The tactical overlay in Grayson's goggles painted the world in shades of cool blue and urgent red. An ammo count, a biometric reading, a compass heading that jittered like a nervous tick. Just data. Ghosts in the machine. Out there, beyond the data, the heat was a physical presence. 112 degrees Fahrenheit of God-forsaken desert pressing in, smelling of baked rock and old dust. The M4 in his hands was an extension of his arms, its weight familiar, comforting. The kick against his shoulder was a conversation he understood better than any human speech. He was a finely tuned instrument of violence, and the man beside him, Miles, was the other half of the song. A glance, a hand signal, a shared nod. They moved like two hands on the same clock, a synergy that came from too many years in too many shitholes just like this one. Operation Sand Serpent, a name a kid would slap on his G.I. Joes. Then the world went sideways. It wasn't a jam. A jam is clean, an absence of sound. This was a presence. A screeching, tearing wall of static that clawed at their eardrums. A physical thing that made the fillings in their teeth ache. It was not just noise. It was engineered malice. Woven into the static, like worms in rotten meat, were screams. Distorted, looped, pitched up and down. They were not real screams from his team, he knew that. But the lizard part of his brain did not care. It bucked and shrieked right along with them. Then the first real sound cut through. The high, flat crack thwump of incoming rounds. Ambush. The rookie, a kid barely out of high school with a face full of acne and misplaced optimism, went down with a wet gurgle, a red flower blooming on his chest. The image of the kid's slack-jawed surprise was a photograph burned onto the inside of Grayson's eyelids. A face he'd last seen staring up at the unforgiving sun as the Casavac chopper's rotors beat dust into his eyes, leaving him and Miles to finish the fight. The kid got a ride home. Miles didn't. The thought of that folded flag, the one he knew the rookie's mother was clutching right now, would fuel 1,000 nights of drinking. The tactical map on Grayson's HUD dissolved into a snowstorm of digital hash. They were blind, deaf, and bleeding. He saw it in a flash of adrenaline-fueled clarity. One way out. A narrow alley between two crumbling mud brick buildings. But it was covered by a machine gun nest spitting fire and hot brass. A death sentence. I'll draw their fire. Miles's voice was a raw shout, barely audible over the chaos. You get the others out. Go. It was not a question. It was a statement. An equation had been presented, and Miles had solved it. His life for theirs. Grayson's job was to ratify the math. He gave the nod. A single, brutal jerk of his head. Go. The word was a stone in his throat. For a moment that stretched into a cold eternity, he watched Miles break cover. He saw the sprint, the muzzle flashes winking from the dusty window. The way Miles's body jerked, puppet-like. He saw the round take him high in the throat, a mist of crimson hanging in the air for a half-second. He saw the look on Miles's face, not pain, not fear, but a blank, cosmic surprise. He was a man who had been told a joke he did not quite get. That face, spattered with his own lifeblood, became the ghost that haunted him. Now his life was a different kind of shithole. The smell was not baked rock, but stale whiskey, overflowing ashtrays, and the faint, sour odor of regret. The third-floor walk-up was less an apartment than a tomb. Empty bottles stood sentinel on every surface. The phone was a dead black plastic rectangle, its silence a blessing. He worked as a bouncer at a dive bar where the floor was perpetually sticky. He was good at it, not because he was tough, but because he was a master of stillness. He would see the pressure building in a drunken loudmouth, the tightening of a fist, the shift in weight, and he would be there. A low word, a hand on the shoulder that was not threatening but was absolutely final. He never let it get to a fight. A real fight meant adrenaline, and adrenaline meant the smell of cordite and the taste of sand and the look of surprise on a dead man's face. He was a ghost haunting the ruins of his own life. One night in early October of 2027, after closing, he stepped into the back alley. The air was thick with the smell of garbage and rain. A figure detached itself from the shadows. Tall, ramrod straight, dressed in a suit so crisp it cut the humid air. Colonel Thorne. His polished shoes were an insult on the grimy pavement. Grayson, Thorne's voice was like ice chips in a glass. "You look like hell." Thorne did not wait for a reply. He moved closer, the scent of expensive cologne a clean violation of the alley's filth. "Your guilt is a resource, Grayson. It makes you predictable. You want to die, but you won't give yourself the satisfaction. I'm offering you a chance to die for something more than a puddle of spilled whiskey on a dirty floor." He held up a thick manila folder. "This is you. Every nightmare, every drink, every time you flinched at a car backfiring. We know it all." Grayson did not need to look. He knew what was inside. The truth. He was already dead. The only question was the shape of the coffin. Thorne was offering a new one. A different one. He looked at the colonel's immaculate suit, at the waiting, unmarked black sedan idling at the end of the alley, its engine a low purr. He did not say yes. He just started walking toward the car, leaving a constellation of empty bottles and one surprised, dead friend behind him. The black sedan had no soul. It moved through the pre-dawn landscape with silent electric efficiency, swallowing miles of Nevada desert without a whisper. Grayson watched the sun bleed over the horizon, painting the mesas in hues of bruised purple and blood orange. It was beautiful, and he felt nothing. He was cargo. They arrived at a place that looked like a geothermal power station, all pipes and vents steaming in the cool morning air. A perfect boring piece of industrial camouflage. A sign out front read Mojave Geothermal Authority Restricted Area. It was a lie designed to be so dull no one would ever question it. The perfect cover for moving heavy equipment and personnel without raising eyebrows. The door hissed open into another world. If the outside was a lie, the inside was a brutalist truth of polished concrete, brushed steel, and cold, unforgiving glass. This was a laboratory. A tomb. They called it the womb. Down a long white corridor, designated Sector Beta. He saw them. The mistakes. The beta tests. In sterile cells behind triple-paned, blast-proof glass, figures twitched and rocked. One was painfully thin, its skin stretched like parchment over a birdcage skeleton. Another, huge and misshapen, sat facing a corner, its broad back rippling with something that was not muscle. Their faces were turned away, but he felt their despair like a low-frequency hum. A woman met him in the central hub. She wore a black tactical jumpsuit that fit her like a second skin, her dark hair pulled back in a severe bun. She moved with a coiled, predatory energy. "Dr. Anya Sharma," she said, her handshake firm, her eyes alight with a terrifying, brilliant fanaticism. "Major Grayson. Welcome." The use of his old rank wasn't just a courtesy. It was a psychological key, a reminder of a structure and a chain of command he once understood. She led him to a briefing room where a three-dimensional hologram of a DNA helix slowly rotated in the air. "We are not creating a monster, Major," Sharma said, her voice ringing with the passion of a true believer. She gestured at the glowing strands of light, then glanced back toward the beta sector. "Those mistakes, as you see them, are betas. Batch 1, initiated March 2027. They were our first steps, grown over 6 months in artificial wombs. He would strap Grayson into a VR rig, the headset slick with his own sweat, and send him back. Back to Operation Sand Serpent. Again and again. But this time there were variables. Sometimes the rookie lived. Sometimes the comms did not fail. Sometimes, in the worst of the simulations, it was Grayson who had to run out into the open, and it was Miles who gave the order. Thorne was not trying to heal his PTSD. He was sharpening it, turning the raw, jagged edges of his trauma into a trigger. A weapon. The physical tests were a special kind of hell. They would strap him into a hydraulic press, a machine designed to test structural weaknesses, and they would break his bones. A clean, clinical snap of a femur or a radius. The pain was blinding. A pure, white nova of agony. Then they would watch. They would time how long it took the nanites to swarm the break, knitting the bone back together with a strange, itching, pulling sensation. Minutes. The bone would be stronger than before, but the memory of the pain remained. It was torture disguised as science. The changes started to manifest. His voice dropped an octave, a gravelly rumble that vibrated in his chest. His senses, already humming from the implants, went into overdrive. The sterile facility became a symphony of torment. He could smell the lingering scent of ammonia from a cleaning cart 2 corridors away. He could hear the frantic heartbeat of a mouse in the walls. And in his dreams, the wolf was closer now. It was not just a shadow. It was a dark, hungry thing with eyes like yellow fire, and it walked beside the ghost of Miles. They put him in a sphere of thick, tempered glass, a containment chamber that looked like something from a deep-sea exploration vehicle. Before they sealed him in, a team fitted him with a skin-tight undersuit. Mark Eye Memory Nanofiber, a tech explained, his voice muffled by his clean suit helmet. It's bonded to the subdermal ports. It will stretch, compress, and reform with you. Standard issue gear won't survive the shift. Then they filled the chamber with a clear, viscous gel, thick as honey and cold as a grave. It pressed in on him, silencing the world, suspending him in a state of artificial weightlessness. The gel will support your skeletal structure during the initial restructuring. Sharma's voice, tinny and distant, came through a speaker in the chamber wall. It will prevent you from tearing yourself apart. We're initiating the sequence now, Grayson. Try to relax. Relax. He almost laughed, but the gel was too thick to even open his mouth. It began not with a bang, but with a pop. A sound like a knuckle cracking, but it came from the base of his own spine. Then another, and another. A symphony of fractures played on his own skeleton. His spine began to elongate, each vertebra separating with a wet, tearing sound. He heard his own ribs snap to accommodate a rapidly expanding chest cavity. The pain was a physical entity, a red, screaming thing that filled the universe. He felt his skin, the skin he had lived in his whole life, split down his back as new, denser muscle boiled up from beneath. His jaw cracked, unhinging, pushing forward, the bone grinding as it reshaped itself into a powerful, elongated snout. The world in the gel chamber, once clear, was now just a crimson blur of his own agony. In the armored control booth, Thorne watched the biometric readouts spike into the red. His heart rate is pushing 300, he said, his voice tight. He's going into cardiac arrest." "No, he's not," Sharma replied, her eyes glued to the monitors, her face a mask of detached fascination. "His heart is no longer just a muscle, Colonel. It's a pump for the nanite slurry. The system is working. He'll hold. The only question is what, if anything, will be left of his mind when this is over." Then, as suddenly as it began, it stopped. The symphony of breaking bones faded, replaced by the deep, rhythmic thrum of a new and powerful engine in his chest. The gel, now clouded with blood and tissue, drained away with a loud gurgle. He collapsed onto the cold metal floor of the chamber, a heap of new limbs and raw instinct. He was a creature of 10 feet from snout to tail, covered in a coat of thick dark gray fur. He pushed himself up, unsteady, his new body a foreign country he had to learn to navigate. His claws, black as obsidian, scraped against the steel floor. A low growl rumbled in his chest, a sound of pure, primal confusion. One wall of the chamber slid away, revealing not an exit, but a mirror, a massive, polished steel plate. He saw it. He saw himself. An anthropomorphic wolf, a nightmare made flesh and steel. The fur was thick and coarse, but through it he could see the dull gleam of the subdermal plating. Along his spine and shoulders, small blue LEDs pulsed with a soft, steady light, the only color in his monochrome world of gray and black. His eyes burned with a yellow, predatory light. He opened his new jaws, filled with teeth like daggers, and the sound that came out was not a word, but a roar of absolute, soul-shattering horror at his own reflection. The training began the next day. They taught him how to move, how to run on 2 legs or 4, how to use the terrifying mass and power of his new form. His sparring partners were Praetorian Series combat drones, hulking metal skeletons that he tore apart with a fury he did not know he possessed. They were just machines, but in his rage, he saw the face of every man who had ever pointed a gun at him, every politician who had sent him to hell, every part of the system that had broken him and remade him into this. Sharma recalibrated his HUD, the green data now superimposed over a world seen through a predator's eyes. It took a week to learn how to speak. The words felt alien, rumbling up from a chest cavity built for roaring. Status report. Asset Fenrir 1. Thorne's voice crackled over the comm. Grayson stood in the center of the training bay, surrounded by the smoking wreckage of 3 drones. He drew a deep, ragged breath. The words came out as a low, gravelly growl, each syllable a struggle. Asset. Operational. Grayson was gone. The man who drank whiskey and mourned his friend was a ghost. Only the asset remained. The briefing room was cold, the air sterile. A holographic map of the Louisiana swampland shimmered in the center of the table, a sickly green island in the darkness. Thorne stood beside it, his posture as rigid as the steel walls. Local law enforcement and the FBI have been chasing their tails for 6 months, he began, his voice clipping the words with military precision. 17 missing persons. Families, hikers, a couple of gator poachers. The papers are calling it the Southern Nightmare. They think it's a serial killer. They're wrong. He tapped to control, and the map zoomed in on a dark, tangled patch of cypress forest and bayou. This is your target. Find it. Identify it. Neutralize it. This isn't just a hunt, Major. It's your final exam. Dr. Sharma stepped forward, her expression a mixture of clinical interest and a proprietary pride. There are significant electromagnetic anomalies in the operational area, she said. her eyes on Grayson. "It's not technological, it's organic. Expect interference. Your implants will experience performance degradation. An unmanned stealth tiltrotor, a machine that moved like a ghost through the night sky, carried him south. The roar of its tilting engines was a familiar sound, a lullaby of war. As the ramp lowered, revealing a black, churning canopy of trees below, Sharma's voice came over his private comm. "Grayson," she said, and the use of his name was a small shock. "Good luck." He did not reply. He just leaped. He transformed in midair, the fall giving his body the space it needed. The change was faster now, a familiar agony, a brutal but efficient reconfiguration. He hit the ground on all fours, the soft, marshy earth absorbing the impact, and the world exploded, not with light or sound, but with scent. It was a physical assault. The rich, heavy perfume of decay, of wet earth and rotting vegetation, the musky tang of alligator hide, the sharp, terrified scent of a rabbit hiding in a briar patch 100 yards away. And under it all, something else, something ancient and green and patient. The smell of the swamp itself, breathing. He began the hunt, moving through the primordial darkness. It was a fusion of two worlds, the tactical precision of a special operator and the raw, predatory instinct of the beast. He moved in silence, a 10-foot-tall, 800-pound shadow. He found the farmhouse first, the home of the last family to vanish. The air inside was thick with the lingering stench of panic, a smell like sour sweat and ozone that had soaked into the wood itself. He saw no blood, no signs of a struggle. Just a meal on the table getting cold, as if the family had stood up in unison and walked out into the night, leaving the door ajar. It was a scene of placid, impossible abandonment, a quiet horror that screamed louder than any violence. Outside, in the mud near the back porch, he found the tracks. They were not animal tracks. They were too large, too deliberate. He knelt, his snout inches from the impression. He inhaled, sifting through the layers of information. "HQ," he rumbled into his comm, his voice a low growl. The tracks. This was not a predator hunting prey. This was a shepherd, herding his flock. He pushed deeper into the bayou, following the trail. The landscape grew strange, hostile. The cypress trees twisted into tormented shapes, their branches like skeletal arms. The Spanish moss hanging from them was not a plant, but the gray, stringy hair of 1,000 drowned men. His HUD began to flicker. The clean green data lines wavered, and for a split second he saw them replaced by jagged, unfamiliar shapes, runes. He blinked, and they were gone. "HQ, the EM field is structured," he reported. "It feels alive." He found the epicenter, a small clearing where the air was unnaturally still and heavy. In the center stood a crude totem made of bone and petrified wood, an altar of some kind. The ground around it was littered with the skeletal remains of animals. All sound ceased. The chirping of crickets, the croak of frogs, the hum of insects, all gone. A perfect, terrifying silence. He knew with a certainty that had nothing to do with tactics, that he had walked into a trap. He could not see the enemy, but he could feel its presence. He was being watched, not by a single pair of eyes, but by the entire forest. Then the attack came, not from the shadows, but from the world itself. The branches of the ancient trees whipped down like razors. The ground beneath his feet turned to grasping, sucking mud. And from the dripping canopy of a monolithic cypress, a figure began to materialize, woven from shadow and moss and ancient rage. The fight was a chaotic, brutal ballet. Grayson's training, all the years of learning angles, fields of fire, and CQB tactics, was useless. It evaporated like mist in the face of this thing. It did not move like an animal or a man. It flowed, a thing of vine and shadow, sliding between the massive trunks of the cypress trees as if they were no more substantial than curtains. Its attacks were not telegraphed by a tensing muscle or a shift in weight. They were simply sudden, violent events. A branch thick as his arm lashing out from a tree 20 feet away, roots erupting from the ground to snare his ankles. The very air thickened, pressing in on him with a suffocating weight. His HUD was a useless blizzard of error messages and strobing warning lights. Target cannot be classified. Biometrics unreadable. Atmospheric anomaly detected. He swiped with his claws, tearing great gouges in a tree trunk where the creature had been a split second before. It was like fighting smoke. Then it was on him. A claw made of sharpened cypress root, hard as iron, raked across his chest. It tore through the fur and flesh and screeched against the subdermal plating, sending a shower of sparks into the gloom. The impact was like being hit by a car. Pain, white-hot and electric, shot through him, and the blue LEDs along his armor flickered and died. Short circuit. He was losing. Badly. He was all brute force. A sledgehammer trying to smash a ghost. He had to think. He had to analyze. But the thing gave him no time. It was a storm of motion, a whirlwind of natural fury. It was not just fighting him. It was defending this place, its altar, its heart. It was using the swamp as its own body. Another blow, this one a piercing strike that punched clean through the muscle and sinew of his left shoulder. The pain was a blinding white light. It dropped him to one knee, a roar of agony tearing from his throat. His vision swam. Grayson. Sharma's voice screamed in his ear, cutting through the static. Your vitals are critical. I'm activating the emergency protocol. It will burn out your reserves, but it'll give you 30 seconds of peak cellular regeneration and metabolic output. Use it. A new fire flooded his veins, colder and more potent than the Lycan 7. It was a cocktail of combat stimulants, supercharged nanites, and raw adrenaline. The world snapped into hyperfocus. The pain receded to a dull, distant throb. The creature, sensing the shift, paused. It drew itself up to its full, terrifying height and let out a soundless roar, an infrasonic wave that vibrated the very air that shook the water in the bayou. It was a natural EMP, and his world went dark. The HUD vanished. The low hum in his ears died. The link to Sharma, to Thorn, to the entire world of men and machines was severed. He was alone. A beast of science and steel, now blind and deaf to his creators, facing a spirit of wood and wrath. And in that sudden total isolation, something shifted. The part of him that was Grayson the soldier went quiet. The part of him that was Fenrir, the lab-created monster, fell silent. What was left was something older, deeper, an instinct that did not need a HUD to see or a radio to hear. He stopped trying to analyze the enemy. He began to feel it. He felt its rage, but beneath the rage he felt a deep, profound weariness. He felt its fear, not of him, but for this place. For the ground beneath his feet. The fight changed. It was no longer a soldier against a target. It was predator against predator, primal. He knew he could not win here. Not in this forest, which was an extension of the creature's will. So he changed the battlefield. He let his wounded shoulder sag, feigning collapse. He stumbled back, drawing the creature away from its central clearing, luring it toward the edge of a steep ravine where a dark, powerful river churned below. The creature, sensing victory, pressed its advantage. It lunged, a killing blow aimed at his throat. Instead of dodging, Grayson lunged forward. He ignored the claws and embraced the monster, wrapping his massive arms around its vine and wood torso in a brutal, crushing bear hug. He drove forward with all his strength, a wrestler's move as old as time. For a moment they were locked together on the precipice, a grotesque tableau of old magic and new science. Then, with a final desperate heave, he threw them both over the edge and into the black, churning water below. The shock of the cold water was a violent baptism. It stole his breath and cleared his head. He was tumbled and smashed against unseen rocks, the current a powerful, indifferent hand dragging him downstream. He fought his way to the surface, gasping, his augmented lungs working overtime. The cocktail of stimulants was wearing off, leaving behind a bone-deep exhaustion and a throbbing universe of pain in his shoulder. He clawed his way onto a muddy bank, collapsing, his massive form shuddering. The transformation began to reverse, a painful, grinding process as bone and muscle shrank back toward the man inside. He found the creature's body a few yards downstream, tangled in the roots of a fallen cypress. As he watched, a change occurred, far stranger than his own. The bark-like skin flaked away, the horns of twisted wood retracted into its skull, the moss and vines sloughed off like a shed skin. The massive, inhuman form shrank, folding in on itself until what lay on the mud was not a monster, but a man. An impossibly old man, thin and frail, his skin the color of ancient parchment, his long white hair matted with mud. He coughed, a wet, rattling sound, and his eyes fluttered open. They were ancient eyes, pale as a winter sky. He looked at Grayson, who was now halfway back to human form, a grotesque hybrid of man and beast. The old man's lips moved, and a voice like the rustling of dry leaves spoke, not in English, but in a strange, archaic dialect of Russian. "You are different," he rasped. "There is metal in you, rage, but there is order." The old man, who called himself Kotar, a guardian, told his story in broken phrases, his strength failing. He was not a monster who hunted men. He was a symbiotic part of this place, a spirit of the forest, a leshy. He had slept for generations, dreaming the long, slow dreams of trees, until the pain woke him. "They do not just cut the trees," he whispered, a tear tracing a clean path through the grime on his cheek. "They cut my fingers. They drain the black blood of the earth. I feel it. All of it. The people. I did not harm them. I herded them. I whispered in their minds, showed them illusions of their deepest fears, snakes, rising water, the faces of their dead. I drove them out of my heartwood, back to their roads, with a terror they could never explain, leaving their homes untouched as a final, desperate warning. I was only trying to frighten them away before the real screaming began." Grayson looked down at his own hands, the claws now retracting into his fingertips, leaving behind dirt and blood. He was Fenrir, the weapon. His mission was to destroy the southern nightmare. But looking at the dying old man, he saw not a nightmare, but a defender. A soldier just like him, fighting for his home. The rigid certainty of his mission, the black and white world Thorn had painted for him, began to crack. A burst of static in his ear. Then Sharma's voice, faint but clear. The comms were coming back online. "Grayson? Grayson, do you read? Your signal is weak, but we're picking up a second life sign. Confirm neutralization of the target. Then Thorne's voice, sharp and commanding. "Asset, report. Is the target eliminated?" Kotar was speaking again, his voice barely a breath. Grayson lowered his head, positioning the audio pickup in his implant to catch the old man's words. Sharma's voice cut in again, urgent. "Colonel, wait. I'm hearing him." Through Grayson's comm, it's speaking. "It's intelligent life, Colonel. This is a breakthrough, not a problem." Kotar knew he was dying. His connection to this land was severed, his strength gone. With a final monumental effort, he reached out a trembling hand and laid it on the damp earth. Then he lifted it and pressed his palm against the battered cryosteel plate on Grayson's chest. A jolt, not of electricity, but of something green and ancient shot through Grayson. "Now, you hear her breath," the old man whispered. "Protect her. This is your penance, your redemption." The light in his ancient eyes faded. His hand fell away. But something remained, a new connection, a low hum in his soul. He could feel the life in the mud beneath him, a slow pulse from the water, the silent pain of the trees. He keyed his comm. His voice, back to its human gravel, was steady. "Final. HQ, this is Grayson. The Southern Nightmare has been neutralized. The immediate threat is gone." He took a breath. "But we have a new asset. Code name Leshy. I'm taking him under my personal responsibility." A long, cold silence stretched across the thousands of miles, a silence more profound than any static. 1 month later, the silence from Nevada was broken by the sound of Thorne's voice. But it was not the controlled, icy tone Grayson was used to. It was the raw, unrestrained sound of pure fury, tinny and distorted over the comms. "You have a new asset. You are taking responsibility. You are a weapon system, Grayson, not a goddamn field commander. You were given a direct order. Neutralize the target." From the background, Grayson could hear Sharma's voice trying to intervene. "Colonel, the subject is a sentient, symbiotic organism tied to the local ecosystem. This is first contact on our own planet. The value is..." "The value," Thorne roared, cutting her off, "is in its obedience. I have a $10 billion weapon system taking orders from a swamp ghost. This is what happens when you start seeing them as people, Doctor. It's out of control." Grayson did not flinch. He sat by the unconscious form of Kotar, feeling the faint, thready pulse of life in the old man, and the deeper, slower pulse of the forest around them. He was calm. For the first time since Miles died, he felt a sense of purpose that was not tied to guilt or a death wish. A recovery team arrived an hour later, fast roping from a Black Hawk helicopter that beat the air into submission. They moved with chilling efficiency, their first priority to secure the airspace and deploy portable jamming screens under the guise of a wildfire survey. A cover story already being fed to local networks. These were Thorne's men, a different breed from regular grunts. All black fatigues and cold eyes, carrying heavy rifles loaded with tranquilizer darts the size of small cigars. Their leader, a man with a face like a clenched fist, leveled his weapon at Kotar. Grayson, now fully back in his human form but still caked in mud and blood, simply stood up and placed himself between the soldiers and the old man. He did not say a word. He just looked at the team leader, his gaze flat and utterly devoid of fear. The message was clear. If you shoot him, you are shooting me, and you had better not miss. The team leader hesitated, then lowered his weapon and grunted into his radio. Back at the womb, the confrontation was immediate. Thorne's office was a minimalist cage of glass and steel overlooking the vast desert. He paced like a caged wolf, his rage a palpable force in the room. You have compromised this entire project. Your sentimentality, your insubordination. Technicians swarmed Grayson upon his return, running diagnostics. The swamp's organic EMP had been more than just a jam. It was a targeted bioelectric attack that had fried the more delicate components of his comms unit and shorted the diagnostic LEDs on his armor. A full system replacement and recalibration were required before he could be considered field-ready again. The damage report sat on Thorne's desk, another black mark against Grayson's insubordination. Grayson stood at ease, his hands clasped behind his back. The fear was gone. The guilt was still there, a cold stone in his gut, but it was not a leash anymore. It was a whetstone. "You told me you were giving me a chance to die for something," Grayson said, his voice low and even. "My purpose, as you defined it, is to protect that thing out there, that spirit." He was protecting his home. I understood his orders better than I understood yours. If you wanted a mindless killer, Colonel, you built the wrong soldier. In the month that followed, the consequences of Kotar's removal rippled outward from the bayou. News channels ran B-roll of the Louisiana coastline, showing unprecedented algal blooms that turned the water a sickening red tide. Local fishermen reported mass fish die-offs. The ecosystem, deprived of its regulator, was collapsing into a state of cascading failure. Kotar was placed in a high-level containment cell, a massive biodome designed to replicate the humid, teeming environment of his swamp. But he was weak, fading. Removed from his home, his life force was draining away like water from a cracked vessel. Sharma, in a move that was both compassionate and coldly pragmatic, developed a serum. It was a nutrient bath derived from soil and water samples flown in from his Louisiana home. Regular shipments of irradiated soil and deep water samples were flown in weekly under the cover of a FEMA-sponsored environmental study. The injections sustained him, but they also made him utterly dependent on the project, tethering the ancient spirit to this sterile Nevada prison with a leash of science. The biodome became Grayson's sanctuary and his classroom. It smelled of damp earth and moss, a living scent that was a balm to his overcharged senses. Inside, under the artificial sun and sky, Kotar slowly regained a sliver of his strength. It was here that the real training began. It had nothing to do with combat drones or VR simulations. "Your strength is not in your teeth," Kotar would say, his voice a dry rustle. He would sit cross-legged on a bed of moss while Grayson, in his massive wolf form, lay before him like a gargantuan, steel-laced hound. "It is not in your claws. It is in the roots beneath your feet. The steel inside you makes you a hammer. The world will teach you to be the river that flows around the stone. You must listen." And so Kotar taught him to listen. He taught him to meditate in the beast's form, to quiet the storm of rage and instinct, and find the calm center. To merge his human consciousness with the animal senses not as a rider on a wild horse, but as two streams flowing into one. Grayson, in turn, would explain the world of men. He would draw tactical diagrams in the dirt with a claw, explaining choke points, fields of fire, the cold logic of modern warfare. It was a strange partnership. The ancient spirit, learning about asymmetric warfare, the cybernetic monster, learning about animism. A bond formed between them, the quiet respect of two old soldiers from different eternal wars. One afternoon, sitting in the humid air, Grayson found himself talking about Miles. He did not plan to. The name just came out, a piece of shrapnel working its way to the surface after years buried in scar tissue. He described the ambush, the static, the look of surprise on his friend's face. He spoke of the guilt that had been his constant companion, the ghost that sat at the bottom of every whiskey bottle. Kotar listened, his ancient eyes patient. When Grayson finished, the old man nodded slowly. "He is not gone," he said. "He is a part of your story now, a part of your pack. A strong alpha carries the memory of every wolf who ran beside him. His life was not a debt for you to pay. It was a gift for you to honor." The word settled into a place deep inside Grayson that Thorne's manipulations and Sharma's science could never touch. That night, for the first time, the nightmare changed. Miles was still there, in the desert sun, but the look of surprise was gone. In its place was a quiet understanding, a nod of acceptance. The weight on Grayson's soul did not vanish, but it shifted, becoming not a burden, but a foundation. Sharma, ever the scientist, watched them constantly. She discovered something extraordinary. When they worked together, their individual energy fields, the bioelectric field of the man-beast and the strange organic EM field of the nature spirit, resonated. They did not just add to each other, they multiplied. She realized with a jolt of awe and terror that she had not just created a weapon. She had accidentally stumbled upon one half of a symbiotic circuit. Elsewhere, in a secure data center firewalled from the womb's main network, a technician who had been monitoring the Louisiana operation finished his work. He copied the complete sensory and combat logs from Grayson's fight, the battle, the communication with Kotar, everything, onto a shielded drive. He then sent a single encrypted burst transmission to an unknown recipient. The message was short. Fenrir project has achieved symbiotic integration. Asset is stable and has exceeded design parameters. Project Orthrus is greenlit for activation. Transmission date: November 15th, 2027. For a final test, Thorne unleashed a new squadron of drones on them in the biodome. They were faster, smarter, armed with cryo-emitters and plasma casters. But this time, it was not a fight. It was a dance. Kotar did not move from his spot, but the environment came alive at his command. Vines snared the drone's legs. A sudden thick fog obscured their optical sensors. Grayson, moving with a newfound grace, became the killing blow. He did not rage. He flowed. A surgical strike to a power cell here, a crushed actuator there. The fight was over in 90 seconds. Watching from the observation deck, Thorne allowed himself a thin, cold smile. His asset was not just controllable. It had become twice as lethal. The emergency briefing was called at 0300. The holographic display in the center of the room was not a map of a foreign country, but a seismological chart of the Rocky Mountains. A series of deep, rhythmic pulses emanated from a single point, deep beneath the granite peaks. "It's not tectonic," Sharma said, her face pale in the glow of the data. She pointed a trembling finger at the repeating waveform. "The intervals are too regular, too biological. It's like something massive is down there, breathing." Thorne brought up a second file. A missing persons report. A team of 6 professional speleologists had disappeared 2 days ago while mapping an uncharted cave system in the same area. Their last transmission, a panicked, garbled scream picked up by a forestry service tower, contained only a few intelligible words. "Cave is alive." God, it's coming from the walls. The U.S. Air Force has already established a no-fly zone over a 200-square-mile area, citing joint training exercises with FEMA for high-altitude rescue scenarios, Thorne added. Any civilian witnesses on the ground, like that Forestry Service operator, will be debriefed and signed to NDAs so watertight they could hold back the ocean. The operation is black. Kotar was brought into the briefing looking frail under the harsh fluorescent lights. He placed a gnarled hand on the console, closing his eyes as the seismic data flowed across the screen. A shudder went through his thin frame. "This is not a spirit of a place," he whispered, his voice heavy with a gravity that silenced the room. "This is older, deeper. This is the hunger of the earth itself, bone and stone, roused from sleep." Thorne outlined the mission. Operation Hades. Simple, brutal objectives. One asset, Fenrir, would descend into the cave system. Locate the source of the disturbance. Assess the threat. And if possible, deploy a newly developed chemical agent to induce a state of prolonged dormancy. Put it back to sleep. Grayson was suited up in the armory. His standard gear was being swapped out for the Mark II integrated combat hardsuit. It unified the memory nanofiber undersuit with segmented, flexible plating bonded directly to its surface, allowing the armor to stretch and shift seamlessly during transformation. Its surfaces were coated with a fine black dust that shimmered under the lights. Diamond laminate, the tech explained, should stand up to geological-grade abrasion. They fitted him with powerful, forearm-mounted ultrasonic emitters and handed him the injector for the chemical agent. It was a heavy, wicked-looking piece of hardware. Before the mission, he found Kotar in the biodome. The old man looked weaker than ever, the dry, recycled air of the facility leaching the life from him. A medical technician was administering his nutrient serum, and the effect was visible. A subtle return of color to his skin, a steadying of his breath. "I'm being sent to kill a mountain," Grayson said, his voice a low rumble. It was not a question, but it was close. Kotar looked up at him, his pale eyes clear. "You are not a killer, Grayson. You are a surgeon. And sometimes, to save the body, a surgeon must cut out the tumor. This thing, it is a cancer in the bones of the world." The flight to the Rockies was tense and silent. Kotar was with them, hooked up to a series of monitors in the back of the tilt rotor. As they approached the Rockies, a medtech carefully administered a booster dose of the nutrient serum into his IV line. "The psychic strain of remote viewing is immense," Sharma's voice noted over the aircraft's internal comms. "His connection to you is the only way we'll get real-time intel down there. The serum gives him about an hour of peak function, but the feedback loop could still kill him if the link is held too long. He was too weak to descend, but he would act as a spotter, a psychic navigator." As the aircraft hovered over the target zone, the rear ramp lowered, revealing a black, jagged maw in the side of a mountain. It looked like a wound. The wind that rushed out of it was cold and ancient, carrying a faint scent of ozone and something else. Something like static electricity. It was the entrance to a hell made of rock and pressure. Grayson stood at the edge of the ramp, the weight of his new armor a cold comfort. He looked down into the abyss, then gave Kotar a final sharp nod. The surgeon was ready to make his incision. The descent was like being lowered into the planet's throat. The air grew thick and heavy, charged with a palpable energy that made the fur on Grayson's arms stand on end. His sense of smell, so potent in the swamp, was useless here. The only scents were the clean, sharp smell of fractured stone, the bite of ozone, and a deeper metallic tang like old blood. His implants struggled, the HUD flickering between tactical data and garbage code. Unlike the swamp's focused organic EMP, the energy here was raw, chaotic, and ambient, a field of geological static that his hardened systems could mostly filter, but not without significant signal degradation. It was like trying to hear a whisper in a hurricane. The walls of the cavern were not silent. They vibrated with the slow, rhythmic pulse he had seen on the seismograph. Thump-thump, thump-thump, the heartbeat of the mountain. His comm crackled. "I can feel them, Grayson," came Kotar's strained voice. "The connection is difficult. It costs much to see this way. They are stirring, like antibodies to an infection. Be ready." He did not have to wait long. They swarmed out of fissures in the rock, scuttling from the ceiling and floor. They were nightmares of geology, creatures that looked like monstrous scorpions, 10 feet long, their bodies formed not of chitin but of jagged crystalline rock. Their claws were razor-sharp obsidian, and their eyes were multifaceted crystals that glowed with a faint internal light. They moved with an unnatural, skittering speed. The HUD failed to lock onto them, classifying them as non-biological terrain features. The first one lunged, and Grayson met it with a roar, relying on pure instinct. The fight was a claustrophobic, brutal affair. In the tight tunnels, there was no room for maneuver, only for head-on violence. His diamond-laced claws screeched and sparked as they tore through crystalline armor. He smashed one creature against a wall, its body shattering into 1,000 glittering shards. Another drove its stinger deep into his thigh, and the pain was cold and sharp, like being injected with liquid nitrogen. Guided by Kotar's faint, distant warnings, left. Above you. 2 more ahead. He fought his way deeper, a whirlwind of gray fur and shattered rock. He was a force of nature unleashed against nature's own aberration. He finally broke through into a vast, central cavern, a geode the size of a cathedral. The walls were lined with colossal, pulsating crystals that bathed the space in an eerie, purple light. And in the center, suspended by thick, root-like stone tendrils, was the heart of it all. It was a crystalline structure the size of a truck, throbbing in time with the pulse that shook the very foundations of the mountain. It was a womb. Even as he watched, a fissure opened on its surface, and a newly formed stone scorpion wriggled out, wet and glistening. He had his target. There would be no putting this thing to sleep. It had to be destroyed. He raised the chemical injector, taking aim at the core. "Grayson, there is a shadow, a distortion in the weave, behind you." Kotar's voice screamed in his ear, filled with sudden panic. At the same instant, a new voice cut into his comm, overriding the channel. It was calm, professional, and utterly unfamiliar. "Asset Fenrir 1, thank you for your service. Project Orthrus is now assuming command." Pain, blinding and absolute, erupted in his back. He was thrown forward, his injector clattering across the stone floor. He twisted as he fell, catching a glimpse of his attackers. 3 of them. They were like him, yet horrifyingly different. Werewolves of science, just like Fenrir, but they were larger, their bodies more twisted and asymmetrical. Their fur was pitch black, their eyes burning with a rabid crimson light. They wore no tactical armor, only raw, mutated flesh and fury. The beta tests. The ones he'd seen locked away in their cells. The mistakes. Grayson landed hard, his vision swimming. The three black beasts circled him, their movements jerky, unnatural. In front of him, the great crystal heart pulsed, preparing to birth another wave of its stone defenders. His calm link to Kotar went dead, replaced by the flat, clean hum of a jamming signal. He was wounded, surrounded by a hostile wolf pack in the heart of a living mountain. The trader's voice came over the comm one last time, a detached, clinical epitaph. Thorn wanted a scalpel. We require a sledgehammer. And you, Grayson, you've just become the first official field test for our new Alpha Pack. Trapped between the mountain's children and man's demons, Grayson pushed himself to his feet. A deep, guttural roar of pure, undiluted fury tore from his throat, echoing off the crystal walls. He had been a soldier, a ghost, a monster, a guardian. Now, they had made him something else. They had made him the enemy. And his war was just beginning.